tourists and National Trust rangers saw the legendary fin disappear into a magical doorway within the rock face here at the Giant's Causeway.
There are places on this earth that feel older than they should. Places where the ground beneath your feet carries a weight that has nothing to do with geology. The Giant's Causeway on the northern coast of Ireland is one of those places. Most people know it from postcards, 40,000 hexagonal basalt columns stepping into the North Atlantic like a staircase built for something that no longer walks the earth. What most people do not know is what happened there in 2024. What a drone filmed. What sonar found. And why the authorities have not yet fully explained any of it. This is not a ghost story. It is something more difficult than that. It is a story about stone that moves, about sound that the human body hears without the ears knowing, and about chambers sealed so long ago that the organisms which once walked this planet alongside whatever is inside them have been extinct for 60 million years. To understand what was found, you first have to understand what the causeway actually is, and the science of how it came to exist is, if anything, stranger than the legend. 62 million years ago, the landmass that would become Northern Ireland was being torn apart. The North Atlantic was opening. The crust fractured not in violent explosive eruptions but in long, low fissures that geologists classify as flood basalt events, relentless outpourings of lava that covered vast areas in slow, methodical layers. At the causeway site, 7 distinct lava flows stacked on top of each other across thousands of years. Each flow was approximately 30 meters thick. The cliff faces that resulted rise roughly 100 meters above sea level. As each layer of lava cooled, something geometrically extraordinary happened. The contracting rock did not crack at random. It organized. Stress fractures formed at 90-degree angles, then migrated toward 120 degrees, the most energy-efficient geometry for dividing a flat surface into equal cells. This is the same mathematics that governs honeycomb, the pattern of bubbles in foam, and the arrangement of cells in living plant tissue. The result is approximately 40,000 interlocking basalt columns, mostly hexagonal, with heights reaching up to 12 meters. The ground, in cooling, wrote its own geometry. A 2018 study by researchers at the University of Liverpool, published in the journal Nature Communications, examined how basalt columns form. Using laboratory experiments that reproduced lava cooling in controlled conditions, the team established that the characteristic columnar jointing begins at temperatures between 840 and 890 degrees Celsius. Not when the lava is fully molten, but after the surface has solidified and the rock beneath it is contracting under thermal stress. The columns do not erupt into existence. They are carved by physics as the Earth cools. This distinction will become important. In the summer of 2024, a visitor launched a small camera drone above the eastern cliff face of the Giant's Causeway to capture aerial footage of the formations. For the first 90 seconds of the recording, the footage shows exactly what any camera would be expected to show: hexagonal pillars, the gray-green shimmer of the Atlantic, the layered geometry of the rock face. Then something else happens. Near a dense cluster of columns on the eastern face, a section of basalt approximately 2 meters wide separated cleanly from the surrounding rock and swung outward in a single, controlled arc. It held position for 11 seconds. Then it returned to the cliff face and sealed shut. The rock surface afterward showed no fracture line. No gap. No seam of any visible kind. The footage was authenticated by 3 independent analysts. The timestamps were intact. Park Ranger Thomas Brennan, who was standing approximately 40 meters from the eastern face when the event occurred, reached for his radio and dropped it twice. His hands would not cooperate. When he finally got through, his voice broke on a single word. That word was, door. 4 witnesses were on the rocks near the eastern face that morning. Investigators interviewed each one separately within hours of the event. Not one of them led with the door. Every single witness, independently, began their account with a physical sensation. Before the rock moved, they said, they felt pressure building in their chests. Not pain. Not fear, initially. Pressure. A slow, rhythmic pushing against the inside of the ribcage, like standing close to a running engine they could not hear. One witness used a phrase the investigators noted specifically in their report. He said the ground had a heartbeat. Science has a precise name for this experience. It is called infrasound, acoustic vibration below 20 Hz, which sits beneath the threshold of human hearing. Your ears cannot detect it. Your organs can. The lungs, the heart, the intestines, and critically the brain all respond to low-frequency vibration even when no conscious awareness of sound exists. The phenomenon was documented rigorously in 1998 by researcher Vic Tandy of Coventry University, who was working late in a medical equipment laboratory in Warwick, England, when he experienced sudden cold sweating, crushing depression, and the visual perception of a grey figure approaching him from the side. When he turned, nothing was there. He was genuinely frightened. He published an account in the Journal of the Society for Psychical Research. The following day, Tandy discovered that a new extractor fan in the laboratory was generating a standing wave at 18.98 Hz. NASA had previously established through research into pilot performance and aircraft vibration that the human eyeball vibrates at approximately 18 Hz. At that frequency, the eyes physically oscillate inside their sockets, producing a smearing effect in peripheral vision that the brain interprets as a dark, moving shape at the edge of sight. Tandy had not hallucinated. His own biology had manufactured the apparition from infrasound. In 2003, Professor Richard Wiseman of the University of Hertfordshire took this further. He and his colleagues concealed a 7-meter infrasonic generator inside a London concert hall and exposed 750 concert attendees to embedded 17 Hz tones during live classical performances. No one in the audience was told which pieces contained infrasound. Afterward, 22% of listeners reported unexplained experiences, anxiety without cause, sudden waves of grief, physical chills moving from the base of the spine to the skull, and chest pressure so intense that several people believed they were having cardiac events. One listener said she was overwhelmed by a vivid memory of her mother's funeral that she had not thought about in years. Wiseman's findings were published in the Journal of the Society for Psychical Research in 2004. Now place those findings at the Giant's Causeway. The site is a basalt cliff face meeting the open Atlantic Ocean. Every wave that strikes that cliff delivers enormous pressure against the rock. Basalt is one of the most efficient conductors of seismic energy on the planet, with P-wave velocities documented between 3.0 and 6.5 km per second. At Fingal's Cave on the island of Staffa in Scotland, which formed from the exact same Paleogene lava flow as the causeway, 62 million years ago, the basalt columns create acoustic resonance so intense that the cave has been audible from considerable distances. Historical accounts describe visitors in the 18th and 19th centuries being so frightened by the booming from the cave's interior that they refused to enter. Felix Mendelssohn visited in 1829 and composed his Hebrides Overture in direct response to what he heard there. The cave's Gaelic name, Uam Bin, means simply the Cave of Melody. The 4 witnesses at the causeway did not hear the infrasound with their ears. Their bodies heard it for them. That is not a metaphor. That is the mechanism. 3 days after the drone footage, a geological survey team brought ground-penetrating sonar equipment to the eastern cliff face. They expected to find a shallow gas pocket or a routine void, the sort of minor cavity common in volcanic formations. What their instruments returned was not routine. Behind the basalt wall, the sonar revealed a sealed chamber. Inside that chamber, several tall, narrow, upright forms stood in a line. Evenly spaced. Perfectly vertical. The proportions were humanoid, broad across the top, narrowing in the middle, with rounded forms consistent with heads. Their height exceeded 8 feet. The lead geologist on the team, described as a career subsurface imaging specialist with decades of experience, ran the scan 4 times using 2 different instruments. Every pass returned identical results. Here is where the finding separates entirely from every comparable archaeological discovery in recorded history. The Lycian rock tombs of southern Turkey, carved in the 4th century BCE and documented extensively by archaeologist Professor Nevzat Sevic of Akdeniz University, contain life-sized human figures sealed inside chambers cut directly into limestone cliff faces. The Lion Tomb at the ancient city of Myra holds 11 such figures, and when the explorer Charles Fellows documented them in 1840, traces of original paint in red, yellow, and blue were still visible on the stone after more than 2 millennia. These figures were placed inside chambers built by human hands. The chambers came after the figures. Whatever the sonar found inside the causeway wall was there before the rock existed. The basalt columns that enclosed that chamber formed at temperatures between 840 and 890 degrees Celsius. At those temperatures, proteins break apart at 60 degrees, far below the threshold. Calcium in bone begins to calcify at 700 degrees. At 840 degrees and above, biology does not burn. It ceases to exist as organized matter. The lava did not kill anything that was biological in the conventional sense. What it did was seal. Whatever is standing in that formation has been standing there, in the same position, since before the mass extinction event that ended the age of non-avian dinosaurs. Following the sonar discovery, authorities restricted public access to the eastern section of the causeway within days. The investigation team embedded vibration sensors in the rock before withdrawing. Those sensors were left running. For 3 months, no one reviewed the data that was being transmitted. When an environmental monitoring specialist finally opened 6 months of continuous sensor recordings, she expected background geological noise, the ordinary seismic chatter of a coastal basalt formation. What she found instead was a rhythmic pulse that had not stopped since the sensors were installed. That alone might have been explainable as tidal resonance, as wave energy converting to vibration in a sealed cavity, as any number of natural acoustic phenomena. But there was something else in the data. The intervals between pulses had shortened by nearly 12% over the recording period. Whatever rhythm the sensors were measuring, it was accelerating. The specialist then cross-referenced the vibration amplitude readings against the site access logs. On 3 separate occasions in the recording period, the vibration amplitude surged, not gradually, but instantaneously. The first spike occurred when 2 maintenance workers approached the restricted section to check a rope barrier. The second was recorded during a nighttime equipment check. The third happened on a morning when tourists accidentally crossed the boundary before staff redirected them. The researcher checked every available confounding variable: seismic activity elsewhere in Northern Ireland, temperature fluctuations, tidal cycles, wind speed. None of them correlated with the spikes. Only one variable matched every single surge in amplitude: the physical proximity of human beings. There is a rational mechanistic explanation for this. If the chamber resonates at a frequency close to the frequencies generated by human footsteps on basalt, then increased foot traffic on the surface would inject additional energy into the system and amplify the vibration output. The stone would not need to possess awareness. It would only need to be shaped in exactly the right geometry to respond to the weight of a human body. That explanation is available. The data does not require abandoning it. What the data does not permit is dismissing the correlation as coincidence. The causeway is not the only ancient site on Earth where stone appears to have been engineered toward a specific kind of concealment or toward permanent closure. The pattern, once identified, is found on every inhabited continent and in every major architectural tradition. The Great Pyramid of Giza was sealed by a swivel door weighing approximately 20 tons. It was balanced on its center of gravity so precisely that a single person could push it open from the inside with one hand. From outside, it was functionally invisible. The Greek geographer Strabo, writing in the 1st century BCE, recorded that the entrance to the pyramid could not be found unless someone showed you exactly where it was. When Caliph al-Ma'mun attempted to enter the pyramid in 820 AD, his workers searched the entire exterior surface and could not locate the entrance. They eventually cut through solid stone, a passage that still bears their name, and discovered the original hidden entrance only after they were already inside. For over 4,000 years, a 20-ton slab hid in plain sight on the most photographed building on Earth. The Lycian tombs of southern Turkey were sealed with sliding stone doors running along carved grooves, a mechanism so effective that treasure hunters in the Antalya region in 2021 had to use dynamite to breach a tomb that had remained shut for 2,500 years. They could find no other way in. At New Grange in Ireland, constructed around 3200 BCE, 5 centuries before the Great Pyramid was begun, archaeologists have documented what may be the oldest confirmed movable stone mechanism in the world. A pair of quartz blocks positioned above the entrance passage functioned as a sliding shutter. On the morning of the winter solstice each year, these blocks were opened to allow a beam of sunlight to travel through a narrow roof box cut above the entrance and illuminate the central burial chamber for exactly 17 minutes. The quartz blocks show wear marks consistent with centuries of repeated sliding movement. The shutter was not built to control who entered the tomb. It was built to control precisely what light reached the dead, and at what moment. At the ancient fortress of Qaza al-Azraq in the Jordanian desert, basalt doors weighing several tons each still swing on their original Roman-engineered pivot mechanisms nearly 2,000 years after installation. A single person can push them open. The engineering principle is identical to the Great Pyramid: locate the exact center of gravity in an irregularly shaped stone, and place the pivot there. The same principle was applied by Edward Leedskalnin at Coral Castle in Florida in the early 20th century, where his 9-ton revolving gate, carved from a single block of coral limestone, could be rotated with one finger until the bearing mechanism failed in 1986. These are not examples drawn from folklore. These are documented, measured, physically accessible structures. The pattern in them is not thematic. It is technical. The same engineering logic, concealed balance points, precision fits, seamless closures, appears in structures built on every continent by cultures with no documented contact with each other. Either the same insight was arrived at independently many times, or the insight is old enough to predate the divergence. The name Giant's Causeway is an English translation of an Irish original, and the translation is not accurate. In Irish, this place is called Closhin na Bomhorak. It does not mean the causeway of the giant. It does not mean the stepping stones of Finn McCool. It means the stepping stones of the Fomorians. In Irish mythology, the Fomorians are not friendly characters in a children's story. They are the oldest beings in the entire mythological tradition, older than the Tuatha De Danann, older than any of the divine races that the medieval texts describe colonizing Ireland in successive waves. Scholar May Herbert of University College Cork, writing on early Irish mythological tradition, describes the Fomorians as representing primal, ungovernable forces, disorder and darkness in their most fundamental form. They predate the gods. They are what was present before the gods arrived. They are associated in every text with the sea, with the deep earth, and with a kind of antiquity that the medieval writers clearly found difficult to express in human timescales. The figure of Fionn mac Cummill, the warrior poet of the Fenian cycle, belongs to an entirely separate layer of Irish mythology. He is not a giant in the original medieval texts. He is a human figure who gained supernatural knowledge as a boy, burned his thumb on the mythical salmon of knowledge while cooking it at the River Boyne, and from that moment could access wisdom by touching his thumb to his teeth. His power is linguistic and visionary, not physical. The giant Finn McCool of the tourist brochures is a 19th-century construction. The scholar W.B. Yeats identified the distortion as early as 1888, noting in his writings on Irish folklore that the pagan heroes of Ireland had expanded in popular imagination until they became giants, losing their original complexity in the process. The oldest tradition does not credit the causeway to Fionn at all. The stones were already there when Fionn arrived. They belonged to the Fomorians. The stepping stones were not built for a battle or for a journey to Scotland. They were the Fomorians' own threshold. Their own doorstep. The acoustic properties of this coastline have been known, if not understood, for centuries. The Irish fishermen of the Causeway Coast have maintained taboos for generations that have no written explanation. They will not speak the name of a pig at sea, calling it instead the fellow with the curly tail. A fox or hare is never named directly, and anything red on a fishing boat carries deep bad luck. When something feels wrong on the water, when the chest tightens for no reason and the skin raises, the traditional protective phrase is two words spoken aloud: cold iron. The fishermen do not explain what they are warding against. In many cases, they no longer know. They know only that the ward is old, and that the feeling it addresses is older still. The French acoustic anthropologist Igor Reznikov has spent decades studying the resonant properties of ancient underground spaces, Paleolithic painted caves, Neolithic burial chambers, Bronze Age passage tombs. His research, conducted over many years across sites in Britain, France, and Ireland, has demonstrated that many ancient stone chambers were not accidentally resonant. Their dimensions appear to have been deliberately calculated. The phenomenon he studies is called Helmholtz resonance, when air is trapped inside a rigid cavity connected to the outside by a small opening, that air vibrates at a specific frequency determined by the volume and geometry of the space. Reznikov found that when sound is produced at the natural resonant frequency of these chambers, the entire structure vibrates: walls, floor, ceiling, and every body present inside the space. He has described the experience, in published accounts, as one in which the whole body vibrates together with the ground, the earth, and the depth of sound. Other researchers building on Reznikov's work found that rhythmic drumming at approximately 2 beats per second inside resonant passage tombs would trigger vibration powerful enough to measurably elevate the pulse rate and breathing of every person present in the space. Now consider the sealed chamber behind the causeway wall. If that cavity connects to the outside atmosphere through even microscopic fissures in the basalt, and all rock has fissures, and if tidal pressure and Atlantic wave energy are forcing air through those fissures in rhythmic pulses synchronized to the ocean's movement, then that chamber functions as a natural resonator on a scale that no human architect has ever deliberately constructed. It would produce infrasound tuned to its own geometry. That vibration would travel through the basalt at 3 to 6 kilometers per second and reach the surface as a slow, rhythmic pulse. A pulse that the human body, standing on the rock above it, would register as one thing and one thing only: breathing. A fisherman who anchored near the base of the eastern cliff shortly before the investigation was made public described something rising from the rocks just above the waterline. He said it was slow. Heavy. He said it sounded like breathing. He pulled his anchor and left without explanation and has not returned. The vibration sensors embedded in the eastern cliff are still transmitting. The pulse has not stopped. The intervals between cycles continue to shorten. The sonar images have not been released publicly. The eastern section of the formation remains behind barriers. The drone footage has been verified as authentic by independent analysis. The stone door opened once on camera. It may have been opening and closing for 60 million years. The question of what the sonar found is not answerable with current information. The question of what the vibration means is technically answerable. The resonance of a sealed basalt cavity under tidal pressure is a physical mechanism that requires no extraordinary explanation. The question of why humanoid forms were standing in position inside the cavity before the rock that surrounds them existed is not answerable at all by any framework currently available to science. What is answerable, and what the evidence does support, is this: every major ancient civilization on this planet devoted extraordinary engineering effort to the problem of sealing chambers permanently, invisibly, and in ways that would not be understood by those who came after. The Egyptians, the Lycians, the builders of New Grange, the Roman engineers at Casa al-Azraq, none of them built sealed doors because they had nothing to seal. They were keeping something in. Or keeping something out. Or, most troublingly, keeping something exactly as they found it for whoever might eventually come after them with the right instruments to look. The oldest name for this place does not speak of heroes. It speaks of the Fomorians, the beings of chaos, the ones who predate the gods, whose relationship to the earth itself the medieval writers could only describe as belonging to a time before time had its present shape. The stone has been here since before the dinosaurs were gone. The pulse beneath it has been counting time in its own rhythm since the lava cooled. And every 6 months, according to the sensor data, the intervals between heartbeats grow a little shorter. Whatever is standing behind that wall, in the dark that has lasted 60 million years, is still there. And the breathing is getting faster.